out of here, you freak! A crumpled fast food cup sails through the air and bounces off the man's shoulder. He barely flinches. Children stare from the monkey bars. Some giggle. A teenager snaps a photo. The man in the threadbare coat kneels by the swing set, silently picking up used candy wrappers, soda cans, and cigarette butts with a grabber claw. His cart, an old shopping trolley with squeaky wheels, stands nearby, brimming with black trash bags. It's the third time this week he's been yelled at. The man doesn't respond. He adjusts the brim of his faded baseball cap, grabs another empty bottle, and places it in a separate recycling bin he brought himself. From the other end of Riverview Park, Principal Dana Ellison watches with a tight jaw. Her young son tugs her coat. "Mom, is he going to live here now?" She kneels and whispers, "No, sweetie. He just likes to help." But she doesn't believe it. No one really understands why this man appears every morning at 6 a.m., rain or shine, to clean the park. Some say he's a Vietnam vet. Others call him homeless or touched in the head. They call him Trashman Terry. But they don't know his real name. And no one knows what he did last summer for the children of Green Hollow Elementary. Harold T. Whitmore had always believed the world made more sense in straight lines and right angles. His garage was a testament to that. Rows of neatly labeled storage bins, a red pegboard holding every tool in its precise place, and a concrete floor so clean you could eat off it. Even the lawn outside was clipped with military precision every Sunday morning at 7 a.m., like clockwork. To Harold, disorder wasn't just unpleasant, it was a warning sign. That's why he became a structural engineer. Blueprints never lied. If a beam was out of line or a load miscalculated, the structure would collapse. But when everything aligned just right, something strong could be built, something permanent. He carried that same philosophy into fatherhood. Daniel, his only child, came into the world one overcast November morning, pink and squalling and perfect. His wife, Ellen, laughed through her exhaustion, squeezing Harold's hand so tightly it left marks. "We made a good one," she whispered, and they had. From the time Daniel could walk, Harold applied his quiet, methodical attention to raising him. Every night meant story time, never skipped. Every weekend, a walk through town or a project in the garage. When Daniel hit 6th grade, Harold taught him how to use a level and power drill. "Measure twice," Harold would say, "cut once." It became their motto, for woodwork, for schoolwork, for life. Daniel wasn't like Harold, though. Where Harold was precise and quiet, Daniel was curious and emotional. He doodled on the margins of his math homework, built elaborate pillow forts in the living room, and once cried for an hour when he found a dead bird in the backyard. "He's a soft one," Ellen used to say, brushing her son's hair. "That's a good thing. We need more soft ones." It was Ellen who brought the balance. She made Harold laugh, kept Daniel grounded, and filled the corners of the house with music and cinnamon cookies. But when cancer took her, everything dimmed. Harold grieved in silence. Daniel, only 16, turned inward. Harold wanted to help, he really did, but he didn't know how to grieve out loud, didn't know how to hold someone else's sorrow without trying to fix it like a cracked floor beam. He filled the house with quiet instead. Still, Daniel made it to college, full scholarship to a state university. He wanted to become a teacher, like his mother had once dreamed of doing, before she chose family instead. "Kids deserve someone who listens," Daniel told Harold over Thanksgiving dinner. "That's what Mom always said, right?" Harold nodded, his eyes stinging. "I want to teach 3rd grade. That's the age when kids decide if school is good or bad." Harold thought it was a noble, logical idea, like reinforcing a beam before it sags. He supported Daniel wholeheartedly. He even opened a dedicated college fund to help with books, housing, and anything scholarships didn't cover. Daniel never had to ask twice. Harold might not say much, but when it came to supporting his son, he never faltered. But something shifted during Daniel's sophomore year. He stopped calling as often. When he came home, his eyes looked dull, and he lost weight. Harold attributed it to stress. Ellen would have caught it, he told himself. She would have known what questions to ask. Then came the injury. Daniel tore his ACL during a pickup basketball game. The surgery went fine, but the prescription meds lingered. Harold didn't think much of it at first. College kids had wild schedules, didn't they? But the pills kept disappearing. Daniel grew quieter, more erratic. One day, Harold found a bottle of pills hidden behind the toilet tank. When confronted, Daniel snapped. I'm fine. You don't get it, Dad. You've never gotten it. It was the last real conversation they had. 3 months later, Daniel was found unresponsive in his apartment by a roommate who came home early from spring break. Fentanyl, a bad batch. The doctors said he was likely gone before he even hit the floor. Harold didn't cry at the funeral. Not because he didn't care. He just didn't know how to grieve anymore. The guests said kind things, left flowers, offered casseroles. But afterward, when the house was quiet and Daniel's room still smelled faintly of his old cologne, Harold sat on the edge of the bed and whispered, "I'm sorry. I didn't know how." He didn't go back to work. He sold the house a month later, packed everything that mattered into a few boxes, and moved to a town 3 hours away, Riverview. He wanted a place where no one knew him. No one would offer pity or ask questions he couldn't answer. He bought a small one-bedroom bungalow with a view of a park. Not because he wanted to live near green space, but because Daniel used to love the swings. Harold never meant to walk that far. That morning, like too many before it, he'd been awake before 4 a.m., staring at the cracks in the ceiling of his bungalow. He hadn't dreamed of Daniel, he rarely did, but the silence in the house still rang too loudly. No coffee, no radio, no newspaper, just motion. So he dressed in jeans, a worn jacket, and his old sneakers and stepped into the misty quiet of Riverview. It was April, and the air had that damp weight of spring, heavy with pollen and promise. He wandered past the shuttered bakery on Main, down to the corner where a newspaper box sat rusting like a forgotten monument. The streets were empty. No cars, no voices, no obligation, just an old man walking because he didn't know what else to do with his feet. Eventually, the sidewalk gave way to dirt and trimmed grass. The path curved gently, welcoming him into Riverview Park, a place he'd passed every day but never entered, until now. The first thing he noticed was the quiet. No traffic hum, no barking dogs, just birdsong, soft and persistent. The kind Daniel used to imitate with whistles on their walks back when Harold still took him to elementary school. The second thing he noticed was the trash, wrappers embedded in the grass, half-buried cigarette butts near the bench. An empty juice box tipped over by the seesaw. He stood there, staring. There was something deeply wrong about it. Not just the litter, but the indifference it signaled. This was a place meant for children, for laughter, for scraped knees and tetherballs. And here it was, abandoned, neglected, disrespected. Daniel would have hated it, so Harold bent down and picked up the juice box, then a crushed water bottle, then a half-eaten bag of stale chips. He walked the perimeter of the park, collecting debris and stuffing it into a leftover grocery bag he found tucked beneath a bush. By the time the sun crept over the horizon, his bag was full, his knees ached, and a strange calm had settled over him. For the first time in weeks, he had done something that felt purposeful. He came back the next day, and the day after that. Within 2 weeks, Harold had developed a routine. He'd leave the house before 6 a.m., gloves on, armed with a trash grabber he found at the hardware store, a roll of garbage bags tucked beneath his arm. He brought a rag to wipe benches, a brush to clean graffiti off the water fountain, and a small toolkit he'd assembled from his garage, just in case the swings ever squeaked or something needed fixing. He didn't tell anyone, and no one asked. The few joggers and dog walkers who passed him in those early hours gave him curious looks. Some nodded, some looked away. Others, especially teenagers, whispered or giggled behind cupped hands. "Hey, it's the janitor of the park." "What a weirdo. Who cleans a park for free?" They didn't know his name, so they gave him one. Trashman Terry. It caught on. He heard it whispered on the playground, saw it scribbled in chalk on the sidewalk one morning. He didn't bother erasing it. It didn't matter. He wasn't doing it for them. Sometimes he'd sit on a bench after his rounds were done and just watch. The sun would rise behind the maple trees on the east side. Dew steamed off the grass. Schoolchildren began arriving in waves, laughing, shouting, chasing one another across the wood-chipped paths. He watched them the way someone watches fireflies, quietly, from a distance, afraid to breathe too hard in case they disappeared. One day, he saw a young girl fall from the monkey bars. She scraped her elbow and bit her lip, trying not to cry. Her friend helped her up, and they sat together on the bench, giggling despite the tears. That's when he realized something. This park wasn't just a space, it was a sanctuary. and it was worth protecting. By the third month, Harold had added more tools to his cart, extra gloves in case someone wanted to help, though no one ever did, a jug of water to rinse off the picnic tables, a small first aid kit. He patched up a broken slat on the swing set, tightened the bolts on the merry-go-round. Painted over graffiti on the north fence twice. Every task had a quiet dignity. No fanfare, no reward, just order being restored where chaos had crept in. It gave him a sense of connection, not to people, but to place, to memory, to something deeper than grief. Each action felt like a conversation with Daniel he never got to finish. Then came the morning he saw the school notice. He was walking past Green Hollow Elementary, just a few blocks from the park, when he spotted the letter pinned to the fence outside the front office. Due to continued budget cuts, the tuition assistance program for the 2023-2024 academic year has been suspended. He stopped walking. The school was small, only a few hundred students, maybe less. Its brick walls were clean, its playground modest but functional. But it was the tone of the letter that pierced him. The words were polite, administrative. But behind them was a quiet desperation. Kids who needed help wouldn't get it this year. Families who were barely hanging on would have to make impossible choices. He stood there for almost 10 minutes, rereading it. And something inside him, something still raw and broken, stirred. Harold had never felt so unsure walking into a bank before. The First County branch on Main Street still had that artificial lemony scent he remembered from opening his mortgage years ago. The floors were too polished, the light too white, and the smiles behind the counters too trained. He waited in line behind a man arguing over an overdraft fee and a woman depositing checks with shaking hands. He kept his eyes down, one hand gripping the green folder inside his coat pocket. When his turn came, he stepped forward and said, "I'd like to request a cashier's check." The teller, a young woman with dark-rimmed glasses and tired eyes, asked, "For what amount, sir?" $68,400. She looked up, startled. That's quite an exact number. Harold didn't flinch. "Yes, it's what's needed." She began typing. "And who should the check be made out to?" Harold paused. The logical part of his brain told him to put down the school's name, something official. But another part, something quieter, deeper, said no. "No name," he said softly. "Just leave it blank." The woman blinked. "Sir, we need to." "Actually," he cut in gently, "you can leave the pay to line empty and just hand me the check. I'll take care of the rest." There was hesitation. He expected it. She asked for his ID. He provided it. "Harold Whitmore," she read aloud. "Would you like a receipt?" "No." She printed the check. The heavy cream-colored paper felt almost ceremonial in his hands. He tucked it into a plain manila envelope he had folded 3 times over, then pulled out a small yellow sticky note from his wallet. On it, he'd written one simple sentence in his firm, mechanical handwriting. "They deserve a chance." He sealed the envelope without a second thought. It was still early when he left the bank. The town was just waking up. Stores were turning on lights, opening metal gates, propping up signs. A mother rushed past with 2 children in tow. One of them trailed a backpack nearly bigger than himself. Harold watched them disappear around the corner and felt something stir inside him. A flicker of the feeling he used to get watching Daniel walk into school with 2 big shoes and a science fair project under one arm. He took a longer route home, bypassing the park that morning. He didn't want to be seen. Not this time. Green Hollow Elementary stood quiet as always. He crossed the staff parking lot where the cars hadn't yet arrived and approached the front door. It had a metal mail slot in the center of the wooden frame. No cameras. No eyes. Harold slipped the envelope in, listened as it slid to the floor inside, then turned and walked away without a backward glance. That afternoon, Principal Dana Ellison found the envelope on the mat as she unlocked her office. She frowned. It wasn't addressed. No return label. Just a manila envelope sealed with thick tape. Probably misplaced paperwork, she thought. She opened it and froze. The check was real, and very large. She reread the amount twice, then again. $68,400. Enough to fund full tuition assistance for the 23 students who had qualified for help before the budget cuts. Her heart pounded. Then she saw the sticky note. They deserve a chance. No signature, no explanation. Dana sat down slowly at her desk, trying to make sense of what was in front of her. She called the bank. The teller confirmed the check was valid, but refused to disclose the customer's information, per instructions from the client. She tried to guess who it might be. A local business owner? A charitable foundation? A wealthy family? But it didn't match anyone she knew. There had been no inquiries, no promises, no fundraising events, just silence and a gift. The following week, the board convened. Parents were notified. Dana stood on stage at the school's end-of-year assembly and made the announcement with trembling hands. A private, anonymous donor had restored the tuition fund. Every family who had qualified for aid would receive full support for the next academic year. The gymnasium erupted. Parents wept. Children clapped, though most didn't fully understand the weight of what had happened. Teachers hugged one another, visibly relieved. No one knew who to thank. Harold, of course, knew, but he never brought it up. He didn't even attend the assembly, though he watched the cars pack the school parking lot from his porch. The next morning, he returned to the park with his trash bags and his grabber claw. Business as usual. Only now, something inside him felt lighter. Not healed, but stitched. A week later, a man in a suit approached him while Harold was clearing leaves from the corner path. "Excuse me, sir," the man said. "You work for the city?" Harold glanced up. "No." The man looked confused. "Oh, I thought you might be part of the parks department or a volunteer program." Harold shrugged. "Just trying to keep the place clean." The man paused. "Well, thank you. We appreciate it." He left, and Harold kept working, but he noticed something in the man's tone, a shift, a politeness, a faint respect. The rumors were beginning, and Harold knew he couldn't stay anonymous forever. At Bev's Corner Diner, the locals were buzzing louder than the flytrap near the window. "You hear about that check?" Carl Henson leaned across the counter, his coffee untouched, steam curling upward in the sunbeam that cut through the blinds. "Whole scholarship fund brought back to life," Bev said as she slid a plate of eggs toward him. "No name, no nothing. Just an envelope on the floor and a note that said, 'They deserve a chance.' Romantic, ain't it?" Chuckled Tina from booth 3, a retired librarian with a conspiratorial smile. "Like something from a Hallmark movie. Mystery benefactor saves the day." Carl grunted. "Ain't no millionaire living in this town quiet like. My bet? It's that fella who's always in the park. Trashman Terry." "Now, Carl," Bev warned, but she couldn't deny she'd thought the same thing. The man was a fixture now, rain or shine. Same jacket, same faded cap. Always working, never talking. Always avoiding the spotlight, like it burned. "Who else?" Carl continued. "Nobody else does what he does. Guy's out there every morning before the sun's even finished its coffee." "Could be some tech startup guy hiding out," Tina offered. "Or someone guilty trying to make good." "Or maybe," Bev said quietly, "he just lost someone." That silenced the room for a moment. By the time July rolled around, the rumors had spread far beyond the diner. At the grocery store, at the gas station, in whispered conversations between teachers and PTA parents, everyone was trying to piece together the mystery. Some claimed they'd seen the man speaking with the school principal. Others insisted he once taught math at a private academy in New York. One theory had him pegged as a disgraced millionaire who'd found redemption in garbage bags and park swings. But none of them knew his name. And Harold liked it that way. He wasn't deaf to the whispers. They reached his ears in fragments as he raked leaves along the pathway or scrubbed the old fountain with vinegar and baking soda. Sometimes people stared. Occasionally someone thanked him, awkwardly, like it was a test. He said nothing in return, just nodded. But deep down, he felt it happening. His silence was becoming its own legend. The less he said, the more people filled in the blanks. It was a strange power. Harold didn't want it. One afternoon, he noticed a chalk drawing near the base of the big maple tree. 3 kids had scribbled their names in bright pink and orange, surrounded by a heart. Above them, in childlike handwriting, were the words, "Thank you, Trashman Terry." He stood in front of it for a long while, then crouched down slowly, one knee cracking with age, and traced a finger around the heart. The chalk smudged slightly under his hand. He didn't erase it. That evening, after he finished his usual loop, he sat on the repaired bench at the edge of the playground, the one with the new bolts he'd installed last week. The breeze was warm and lazy, rustling the trees. In the distance, he could hear the faint sound of a trumpet coming from one of the nearby houses. Someone practicing, perhaps. He closed his eyes and allowed himself a moment. Not peace, but stillness. That's when he heard her. "Excuse me," a soft voice said. Harold opened his eyes to see a woman in her late 30s, dressed professionally, standing beside the bench with a plastic cup of iced tea in her hand. "I'm Dana Ellison," she said, "principal at Green Hollow." Harold simply nodded. She didn't sit. "I wanted to say thank you." "For what?" "For cleaning. For showing up. For caring." He gave her a long look, then shrugged. "Someone has to." She smiled faintly. "Not many would. And about the envelope," he looked away. "I don't know anything about that." Dana chuckled softly, not pressing. "If you ever want to come by the school, the kids would love to meet you. Maybe talk about how to take care of public spaces. Responsibility, stewardship. I'm not good with crowds." "That's okay," she replied. "The quiet ones tend to say the most when it matters." She left him the tea on the bench and walked off, heels clicking softly down the path. Harold didn't touch the cup, but he watched her until she was out of sight. Later that night, he stood in front of his small hallway mirror and stared at the reflection. His beard had grown in more white than he remembered. The cap looked older. His shoulders more sunken. He opened the old green folder again. Inside were the bank slips, the envelope receipt, and a copy of Daniel's last school ID card. Underneath, folded beneath old utility bills, was the letter Daniel had written to his mother in his freshman year. Harold had never shown it to anyone. He'd found it in Ellen's things after her death. He read it again. "I want to teach third grade. They're old enough to ask questions, but still young enough to believe in magic. If I can be the reason one kid feels safe enough to dream, I think that would be a life worth living." Harold ran his fingers over the page. For the first time in years, he whispered, "I'm trying, kid." The thunder began rolling in around 2 a.m., low and distant, like some great beast stirring beneath the clouds. By 4:30, the rain was pounding the rooftops of Riverview like fists. Most people pulled the blankets tighter and turned over in bed. But Harold was already awake, sitting by the window with a thermos of weak coffee and his rain gear folded neatly beside him. He didn't question whether to go. It wasn't a choice. The park would be in chaos. Trash bins knocked over, pathways flooded, branches splintered across the playground. And someone had to take care of it. By 5:45, he was outside, wearing his old yellow raincoat with duct tape around the sleeves and pushing the squeaky cart covered by a plastic tarp. The streets were empty, except for the occasional flash of a passing car and the hissing splash of tires cutting through puddles. When he arrived at Riverview Park, it was worse than he expected. The swing set was twisted from the wind. A tree limb had crashed into the sandbox. Trash was everywhere. Plastic bags tangled in bushes, fast food wrappers plastered against fences, juice boxes floating in muddy water. Harold stood at the entrance for a long second, rain drumming hard on his hood, and then got to work. He started with the path, clearing it slowly with a wide rake and his gloved hands. The cart's wheels got stuck in the mud more than once, but he didn't complain. He just pulled harder, grunting through the resistance. At one point, he paused beneath the big oak tree to catch his breath. Water dripped from his hood, down his nose, into the collar of his coat. And still, he pressed on. He was halfway through dragging a branch off the walkway when he heard the voice behind him. "You shouldn't be out here." Harold turned. Dana Ellison stood under a large blue umbrella, her hair soaked despite the effort. She held a thermos in one hand and a reusable shopping bag in the other. She wore old rain boots that splashed with each step. "I've got extra gloves," she added, "and coffee." Harold blinked rain from his eyes. "You didn't have to come." "Neither did you," she replied. He looked down at the branch and kept pulling. "I do." Dana stood beside him, not pressing further. Instead, she crouched down and began picking up soaked paper plates and candy wrappers, dumping them into a trash bag she'd brought. They worked in silence for several minutes. The sound of rain filled the space between them, steady, cleansing. Eventually, Dana broke it. "You know, when I first started teaching, I used to think everything had to be big to matter. Big speeches, big fundraisers, big gestures. But then, one year, I had a student named Brielle who refused to speak in class. Harold didn't look up, but he listened. She was shy, closed off, never raised her hand, never smiled. I thought I was failing her. But on the last day of school, she gave me a drawing, Just stick figures, crayon colors, a big purple heart. And inside the heart, she wrote, "You help me feel seen." Dana smiled softly at the memory. I cried like a baby in the teacher's lounge. Harold kept picking up debris, but there was a shift in his shoulders, a stillness. Then finally he said, "Some people, they go unnoticed until they disappear." He didn't elaborate. Dana didn't need him to. They worked for over an hour until the rain lightened and the sun began to peek through the ragged clouds. The park still looked battered, but cleaner, cared for. Harold sat heavily on the bench, soaked to the bone, his knees aching. Dana offered him the thermos again. He accepted this time. "Why this park?" she asked gently. Harold stared out at the puddles shimmering in the morning light. "My son used to love swings." Dana didn't say anything, just nodded slowly. Was he a student? He wanted to be a teacher, 3rd grade. Said it was the last age where kids still believed in magic. Dana's throat tightened. His name was Daniel. Lost him 4 years ago. "I'm so sorry," Harold simply said. "I wasn't there the way I should have been." Dana placed a hand lightly on the bench between them, not touching him, just near. "You're here now." As the sun broke fully through the clouds, warming the wet ground and casting golden rays across the soggy wood chips, Harold stood up. "I should finish the West End," he said. Dana smiled. "I'll bring towels and donuts next time." Harold gave the faintest nod, then turned back to the path. And for the first time in years, someone walked beside him. Dana Ellison stared at the search bar, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. It was a slow Friday afternoon at the school office, the kind where paperwork stacked slowly and coffee cooled before you could finish half the cup. But her mind hadn't been on forms or parent emails since the rainy morning in the park. The man's words had stayed with her. "My son used to love swings. He wanted to be a teacher. So had his silence." She opened the county database, the one used to look up residency records and staff backgrounds. She typed in the name Harold T. Whitmore. Only one match came back. Riverview Township. Owned a small property on Laurel Street, about 5 blocks from the school. She clicked. Born in 1958, retired civil engineer. Lived alone. Next, she searched news archives. The local paper was limited, but it still turned up something. Daniel Whitmore, 24, passed away unexpectedly in his apartment near University Hill. A promising education major, he was known for his volunteer work and dedication to children's literacy programs. There was a photograph. A young man with a soft smile and intelligent eyes. Dana felt something seize in her chest. She printed the article and sat back in her chair, staring at the ink until it blurred. Now it all made sense. The park, the silence, the donations, the pain behind the man's tired eyes. He wasn't just trying to clean up the mess left behind by others. He was trying to preserve something sacred. That evening, Dana drove to Laurel Street. The house was small, pale green with a sloped roof and a thin porch. A bird feeder hung lopsided from a low tree branch. On the steps sat a worn pair of rubber boots. She didn't knock. Instead, she slipped the folded article into an envelope with a handwritten note. "He would have made a wonderful teacher. And I think he would have been proud of the way you've kept showing up. D.E." She tucked it gently into the screen door and walked away before the porch light flicked on. Inside the house, Harold had been reading, an old paperback about bridge design he'd read a dozen times before, but couldn't seem to stop revisiting. When he opened the door, the envelope fell at his feet. He stood there, staring down at it, unsure. Finally, he brought it inside and sat at the kitchen table. The obituary cut through him. He'd avoided it when it was first published. Couldn't bear to read his son's name in print, reduced to a headline and a paragraph. But now, years later, it felt like someone had gently unearthed a buried part of him. The note was written in careful, teacher-like script. He read it 3 times. He would have made a wonderful teacher. He didn't cry. Not exactly, but something in his chest eased, like a weight that had been pressing for too long had finally shifted, just slightly, enough to breathe around. The next day, when Dana walked through the park on her lunch break, she found a folded page resting on her usual bench. It was a copy of Daniel's freshman year essay, titled "Why I Want to Teach." At the bottom was a single note, written in a hand she recognized from the sticky note on the scholarship check. "Thank you for remembering him, H." In the weeks that followed, things changed in subtle but meaningful ways. Children waved when they saw Harold pushing his cart. A teenager helped him repaint a bench one Saturday morning, wordlessly joining in with a can of fresh blue paint. A woman left a plate of cookies beside the drinking fountain with a napkin that read, "Thanks for all you do." And all the while, Harold kept working. Still quiet, still methodical, but now noticed, seen, not for what he had lost, but for what he had given back. One evening in late September, Dana stood at the edge of the playground and watched him adjust the bolts on the seesaw. The sky above was painted in hues of tangerine and lavender, the sun melting behind the trees. "You ever think about speaking at the school?" she asked. Harold looked up. "About what?" "About Daniel. About showing up. About how sometimes the smallest acts hold the most weight." He considered it for a long moment, then said, "Maybe." It was more than she expected. Harold didn't expect a crowd. He had planned to do what he always did on the second Saturday of October: clean the north path, tighten the picnic table bolts, and maybe replant the mums along the sidewalk that had been trampled during last week's soccer game. Instead, he found folding chairs arranged in rows across the park lawn. Children in matching green hollow t-shirts were gathered near the swings, holding balloons and paper flags. Parents lined the trail. Someone had set up a table with lemonade and cookies. A microphone stood on a small wooden podium by the playground, and at the edge of the clearing beneath the big oak tree, a cloth-covered plaque waited. Harold turned on instinct, ready to walk away. But Dana was already walking toward him. She wore a navy blue cardigan and a calm expression. "If you leave, I'll just have to drag you back." Harold raised an eyebrow. "You planned this." "I did," she said simply. "And so did the PTA, and the town council, and the kids." "I didn't ask for this." "I know," she replied, gently touching his elbow. "But sometimes gratitude has to be louder than silence." She nodded toward the empty bench they'd refurbished together. "Besides, we didn't put your name on the park sign, just on something that deserves to last." Before he could respond, the mayor stepped up to the microphone and tapped it gently. The small crowd hushed. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice amplified across the breeze. "We're here today to recognize someone who has, without asking for credit or praise, quietly shaped the soul of this town." Harold froze. A boy near the front shouted, "Trashman Terry!" and the crowd chuckled. The mayor smiled. "Yes, though I've come to know him as Harold Whitmore." Heads turned. A few people gasped. Several began to clap. Harold stood still, his hands deep in his jacket pockets. "He's not just the man who keeps our park clean," the mayor continued. "He's the one who gave our children the gift of education when the world threatened to take it away. He's proof that showing up, every day, without applause, is sometimes the greatest act of love." She stepped aside. Dana approached the plaque, pulled the cloth down, and revealed a bronze square affixed to the bench's stone base. The crowd leaned in to read, "In honor of Harold T. Whitmore, a quiet guardian of Green Hollow, who reminded us that kindness doesn't need permission to matter." The applause was instant, warm, not performative, genuine. Harold's jaw clenched, his eyes blinked quickly. He hadn't cried at Daniel's funeral, hadn't cried when he packed away his wife's sweaters. But something about seeing his name carved in bronze next to words that actually saw him, not just as a man who collected trash, but as someone who tried to fix what was broken, made his chest tremble. Dana stepped closer. "Would you like to say something?" He shook his head. "No speeches." "That's okay," she whispered. "Just stand here with us." He did, and it was enough. After the ceremony, people lingered. A woman hugged him and pressed a small card into his hand. "If you ever need a warm meal." A boy gave him a drawing of a man pushing a cart with a smiley face and stars all around him. He laughed at that one. It felt strange, being seen. He wasn't sure if he liked it. But he didn't hate it either. One of the older teachers approached him near the water fountain. "I was Daniel's freshman English professor," she said softly. "He was a brilliant writer. He quoted Maya Angelou in every essay." Harold nodded. "He always said words were stronger than hammers." "He was right," she said, smiling, "and he would have made an incredible teacher." Those words stayed with him long after the park emptied out and the balloons began to drift into the sky. That evening, Harold sat on his porch as twilight fell. The scent of grilled food and fallen leaves carried on the breeze. He pulled out the card the boy had given him and set it on the table beside a cold cup of tea. Then he took out the letter Dana had returned, the one Daniel had written his first year of college. He read it again, this time aloud. I want to teach third grade because that's when the world starts telling kids they can't be astronauts or poets or explorers. I want to be the voice that says they still can. Harold stared into the distance where the last hints of light dipped behind the park trees. I hear you, son, he murmured. I hear you now. The morning after the ceremony, Harold arrived at Riverview Park at 5:57 a.m., just like always. The air was crisp with autumn's breath. Leaves crunched underfoot. The bench with the plaque gleamed faintly in the rising light, the bronze already burnished by dew and memory. But something was different. Someone was waiting for him. A girl, no more than 12, stood beside the swing set, hugging a plastic rake and a dustpan like they were swords. Her backpack was on the ground beside her, its keychains jangling slightly in the breeze. She wore an oversized hoodie and sneakers that looked like they'd seen better days. Harold slowed, unsure. She waved first. You're Mr. Whitmore, right? She asked, stepping forward with the directness only kids seem to manage. I am, he said cautiously. I'm Clara. I go to Green Hollow. My mom said I could come help if I got here before school. She packed me gloves and everything. Harold blinked. Help? Clean? She nodded fiercely. I want to earn my community badge for scouts. But I just thought it would be cool to help. He looked down at her gloved hands. One of them clutched a mini spray bottle labeled vinegar mix. He chuckled despite himself. You came prepared. She grinned. Always. Without waiting for instruction, she marched over to the trash bin and began sweeping around it, her ponytail swinging like a metronome. Harold watched for a moment, then rolled up his sleeves. They worked in companionable silence. Clara was efficient, focused, occasionally humming something off-key. She asked simple questions. What park tools worked best? What was the worst kind of litter? Chewing gum wrappers, Harold muttered, and whether squirrels counted as co-workers. When the clock neared 7:30, she wiped her brow and looked around. This place looks better already, she said. It does. Can I come tomorrow? Harold hesitated, then nodded. Sure. By the end of the week, 3 more kids had joined. Marcus, who brought his own push broom. Gia, who created laminated "Please Don't Litter" signs and taped them to the fence. And David, a quiet boy with a stutter, who never said much but always arrived early and carried the heaviest bags without complaint. The unofficial group became known as Harold's crew. He didn't name them, but the label stuck. Every morning, they cleaned, sometimes in silence, sometimes with music playing from someone's phone. The work became less about tidying and more about presence, about showing up for the place that showed up for them. Harold found himself teaching again, not in a classroom, but in gestures, glances, little nudges toward pride and ownership. Straighten the bin, no shortcuts. Wipe the bench legs too. People notice details. Work like it matters. And the kids responded. They learned. They improved. And more than once, Harold caught himself smiling. One afternoon, Clara stayed behind after the others had left. She sat beside him on the bronze plaque bench, legs swinging beneath her. Do you miss your kid? She asked out of nowhere. Harold didn't answer right away. Yes, he said eventually. Every day. She nodded solemnly. My dad left when I was 5. I don't remember him much, but I think missing someone isn't about time. It's just about how much you needed them. Harold stared at her. Such an old thought in such a small voice. You're right, he said. She smiled sadly. I like it here. I feel better when I'm picking up trash, like it clears my brain. Harold placed a hand gently over hers, not heavy, just present. That feeling, he said, doesn't go away when you grow up. The local paper wrote a feature, From Grief to Giving, the quiet man who transformed Riverview Park. It included quotes from parents, students, and even an old maintenance supervisor who claimed Harold once redesigned a highway interchange just to save 3 trees. Photos followed. Recognition too. Dana tried to shield him from the flood of attention, but it was too late. People waved when he walked to the store. A city council member offered him a part-time position overseeing park beautification. He politely declined. I'm not a program, he said. I'm just me. Still, there was something undeniable about the shift. What once had been a quiet personal ritual was now a movement, a ripple turned into a current. And for the first time in years, Harold felt like he wasn't just trying to hold on to the past. He was helping shape something that might last longer than even memory. That weekend, Dana invited him to speak at the school's fall assembly. "I don't do microphones," he warned her. "You don't have to speak," she said. "Just be there." So he stood on stage beside her while she read a letter aloud, one written by Daniel his freshman year of college. It was the same one Harold had tucked away for years. "I want to teach third grade because they're not too young to understand and not too old to stop believing. I want to help them stay open to wonder, to curiosity, to kindness." The room was silent. When she finished, Dana looked at Harold. "Thank you," she said, "for making sure someone did exactly that." Harold didn't say anything, but he stepped forward slowly and shook her hand in front of the whole school, and the applause felt like forgiveness. The envelope sat unopened on the kitchen table for 2 full days. Each morning, Harold brewed his coffee, swept the back porch, watered the spider plant on the windowsill, and ignored it. And each evening, when the light slipped through the curtains and painted soft gold across the old wood floor, the envelope remained where he left it. Unread, undisturbed. He knew what it said. He didn't need to open it to know. The return address was printed in elegant serif, the American Chronicle, a national paper, one with reach, with readers, with headlines. He could picture it already. His name in bold letters, a dramatic title, "The Man Who Swept a Park and Saved a School." He hated it. He wasn't a symbol. He wasn't a story. He was just a man who got up early and tried to put order into a world that kept unraveling. But something about the envelope gnawed at him. Not because he wanted credit, because it might be the only way left to say Daniel's name out loud and have people really listen. On the third morning, Harold finally picked it up. He sat at the table, the edges of the envelope soft from being moved and turned and avoided. He opened it carefully, like unwrapping something fragile. The letter was handwritten. "Dear Mr. Whitmore, we've been following your story after your town's recognition ceremony. Our team is deeply moved by your quiet service and what it has meant to the families and children of Riverview. We'd be honored to share your story, not for fame, but to inspire others. With your permission, we'd like to send a writer to Riverview to speak with you, at your pace, in your space. Sincerely, Elliot Rowe, Features Editor." The American Chronicle, no clickbait, no spectacle, just a request, and a door Harold could choose to open. That afternoon, he took a slow walk through the park. The kids weren't there, too early, and the air had a softness that made his thoughts feel gentler. He paused beneath the swing set. Daniel's favorite spot. He remembered a spring day long ago when Daniel was 10, his knees scraped, his hair wild with wind. He had just lost a spelling bee, misspelled vicinity, and had cried for a full hour. "I failed," he said. Harold had crouched beside him, heart awkward in his chest. "No," he'd said, "you just got one word wrong. Failing is when you don't show up again." Daniel had stared at him, then wiped his nose and muttered, "That's the lamest dad wisdom ever." Harold had smiled. It'll age well. And now, here he was, all these years later, still showing up. Maybe that counted for something. He called the number on the letter the next morning. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and warm. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. We can work around your comfort. No cameras, no flashing lights, just a writer and your words if you're willing to share them." He said yes. The appointment was set for Thursday. The woman who arrived was younger than he expected, early 30s, with a worn leather bag and notepad instead of a tablet. She introduced herself as Margot Lane. She didn't wear perfume. Her clothes were plain. She asked before sitting, listened before speaking. Harold liked her immediately. They sat at his kitchen table, sunlight warming the linoleum. The room smelled faintly of fresh coffee and lemon oil. She didn't begin with, "Tell me about the scholarship." Still filled his cart with bags and tools. But more people began to join him, strangers, families, veterans, even 2 teachers from the high school. He no longer felt like a man fixing a park. He felt like part of a garden being tended. And Daniel's name, spoken aloud, became less painful. Not because it hurt less, but because it had purpose now. It reached people. Snow fell in quiet sheets over Riverview Park, coating every branch, every bench, every stray bit of litter Harold once gathered. It was early, just after dawn, and the park looked pristine, as if no human had set foot in it for weeks. But in truth, The park had never been cleaner or more cared for. A dozen volunteers rotated shifts in winter coats and knit caps, bundled up in scarves, shoveling paths and brushing snow from seats so that children and parents could still come and play. Yet one crucial element was missing. His cart, once a constant companion, stood empty against the fence, its wheels locked. The grabber claw, its metal tip dulled by countless uses, was nowhere to be seen. On the bench with the bronze plaque, freshly polished by an afternoon volunteer, there was no familiar figure stooped in concentration. No steady hands tying up trash bags. No soft murmur of greeting as early risers entered the park. Clara arrived first that morning, trailed by Marcus, Gia, and David. Clara's cheek dimples peeked out when she caught sight of the bench. Then her forehead puckered. "He's not here," she whispered. "Maybe he's inside," Marcus offered optimistically, stamping his boots. "I'll go check around." He left the group and walked toward the park's small maintenance shed. The other three huddled together, rubbing their cold hands and looking at footprints that led only up to the bench and then vanished beneath fresh snow. The footprints of one person. No bike tracks, no second set of long strides. Clara's breath puffed in front of her. "Do you think he's gone for good?" Gia shook her head, pushing a strand of hair under her beanie. "Maybe he's sick. We can wait." David bit his lip. "Or maybe he's moved somewhere else. Maybe the park doesn't need him now." Clara's heart pinched. "That can't be true. We need him." Across the street, Dana Ellison arrived in her car. She parked and hurried through the snow toward the playground, her boots crunching on the thin ice of the path. She saw the kids clustered at the bench, heard their soft voices. "What's wrong?" she asked, kneeling beside them. Clara pointed. "He never misses. But look, today the bench is empty." Dana felt her own breath catch. She scanned the park, the cleared walkways, the shoveled steps, the neat rows of raked leaves under the shelter of bushes, evidence of continuing care. Volunteers were on schedule. The park was thriving, and yet Harold was nowhere. Dana reached out and placed her hand on the plaque. "He once told me he wouldn't ask for thanks," she murmured, "but he also said he needed this place as much as it needed him." The sky brightened. Faint orange light filtered through the clouds, reflecting off white drifts. Dana stood, straightened her coat, and met the children's eyes. "I'll help you look for him," she promised. "But maybe we should think about why he might have stopped coming." Meanwhile, in his small, pale green bungalow on Laurel Street, Harold sat by the window facing the park. He hadn't left his chair all morning. A half-finished cup of coffee had gone cold at his elbow. On his lap lay Daniel's old college essay folder, and beneath it, the yellowed Post-it that started it all. They deserve a chance. He watched the park, his life's work, in silent admiration. Every lined path, every painted bench, every new sign bore the imprint of the community he helped build. But he also felt an unfamiliar tug, a sense that his purpose had shifted. When he came here alone, he had been tethered to the memory of loss, his son's laughter and dreams lingering in every corner of the playground. Over time, the park had become less of a shrine and more of a shared home. Others had taken up shovels and brooms, layered their own hopes onto the cleared paths. And in doing so, they had freed him. He realized that by stepping back, he was letting the next generation write their own stories. He closed his eyes. The letters and numbers on the plaque swam in his memory, quiet guardian of Green Hollow. But the plaque was no longer just his. It belonged to every person who had cared enough to keep showing up when he was absent. That was the real tribute. Soft footsteps roused him. He looked up to see Dana standing in his doorway, her snowy boots on the mat. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said. "The kids are worried." He shook his head. "I understand." She crossed to him and sat in the chair across from his, leaving a respectful distance. "Why did you stop coming?" He thought of the empty bench, of Clara and her friends searching, of the park alive with others' efforts. He took a breath. "Because I needed to remember that this place isn't mine. It belongs to everyone who believes it's worth protecting." Dana frowned. "Were you afraid it would fall apart without you?" He smiled wanly. "I wanted them to find their own strength. Not because they needed me, but because they were the ones who needed to learn they could do it themselves." Dana reached out and placed her hand over his. "You've given them more than they know." He looked at her. "And they've given me something I thought I'd lost." She waited until he continued. Hope. Back at the park, Clara and her friends hadn't given up. As Dana and Marcus returned together, they spotted a solitary figure walking along the east path, back turned to them. His coat was the same threadbare jacket, his cap the same faded baseball hat. But he wasn't dragging a cart. Instead, he carried a single small sapling wrapped in burlap. Clara gasped. "Mr. Whitmore!" He turned. His face was calm, eyes bright with a subdued joy. Clara ran forward. "We were so worried. Why did you stop coming?" Harold knelt and gently brushed snow from the sapling's roots. "I stopped coming alone." He nodded to the children, then looked at Dana. "I have one more thing to do." He stood and moved toward the center of the clearing where the bench sat. The sapling's branches, leafless now, reached toward the sky in a silent plea. The volunteers gathered, teachers, parents, teenagers who once whispered about Trashman Terry, now wearing park badges around their necks. They watched as Harold knelt in the snow and began to dig with a small shovel he had brought. Clara and the others joined in without a word, adding shovelfuls of soil around the roots. Dana handed Harold a watering can. He poured water gently at the base. When he rose, the sapling stood upright, its slender trunk nestled beside the bench with the plaque. Harold brushed snow from his gloves and turned to the crowd. "This is for Daniel," he said, voice steady but soft. "He loved this park when it was empty and broken, just like this spot looked when we first met." He gestured to the sapling. "Now it will grow, like hope does, with each person who cares for it." A hush fell. Then Clara whispered, "It's beautiful." Harold nodded. "Yes, and now it belongs to all of us." The morning sun finally broke through the gray clouds, casting a warm glow over the newly planted tree. As the volunteers cheered and began taking turns patting soil around its base, Harold stepped back and watched them, no longer a lone guardian, but a member of a living community. He looked at Dana, who smiled and gave him a thumbs up. He returned the gesture with a grateful nod. The bench was no longer empty. It was surrounded by new beginnings. Laughter, shared effort, and the slender promise of growth. And as the sapling's branches swayed gently in the breeze, Harold realized that some legacies aren't cast in bronze. They're rooted in soil, watered by every hand that chooses kindness over indifference.